Namaste and a warm welcome to the Ex-Christian Show, the insider view of Christianity from the outside. I have with me today Maya Ram. Maya is a good friend and fellow intellectual Kshatriya. And Maya is also, which is going to be her identification for this particular video, she's also an ex-Adventist, that is a former Seventh-day Adventist. Welcome to the Ex-Christian Show, Maya. Nice to have you.
Namaste, Esther J. Thank you for having me on your show. I have been waiting for this moment for a very long time.
Yeah, a lot of my viewers, below every video, I get this recommendation to get you on the show, and it happened finally.
It has
So I'm
happened
glad
finally.
you're here.
And I'm
Yes.
humbled that you call me a fellow intellectual Kshatriya. I'm just another Sadak, just going through, just on my own journey. And yes, I definitely have a lot to say, certainly.
Let me give a definition for intellectual Kshatriya. Anybody who gets onto the public platform and anybody who joins because we are calling it Kshatriya, I would like to generously use the word the warfare. So anybody who joins the warfare is a Kshatriya. And since we're doing it on an intellectual platform, trying to bring in the academics into this warfare, it becomes an intellectual warfare. So yes, so that's what is really commendable. And viewers, the reason I used ex-Adventist instead of general ex-Christian is because Seventh-day Adventism is a cult, and getting out of a cult is way more difficult than getting out of Christianity. Um, could you begin with defining cult? What is a cult?
Yes, that's a very good question because others have would have different definitions of a cult. I think the mainstream definition of a cult is a group that convalescence around one leader, one strong person. And it's not always religious. It can be a cult of personality, or it could be an ideology. And how it differs from a religion, proponents of religion believe that their religions do not convalesce around one person necessarily, although I beg to differ. I was looking at how Christians define a cult, and I found this interesting sermon by one Philip with what's his name, Phil Johnson. He's a pastor at Grace Life Church, which is headed by John MacArthur. Here's what he defines a cult as. A cult is an authoritarian, elitist, religious sect which teaches that salvation hinges on membership in their group, and yet they depart from one or more essential points in the ancient ecumenical creeds. As in, I'm assuming mainstream Christian creeds.
Creeds, yes.
Yes.
I do not agree that Seventh-day Adventism is a religion. It's not mainstream Christianity. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maya.
That is certainly the perception of many Christian denominations that are considered quote unquote mainstream. Perhaps I should give a history of how this denomination came about, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I would want you to start there. Yes.
So the Seventh-day Adventist denomination came about first as an offshoot of a movement that had happened years earlier called the Millerites. So this American named William Miller held that the world was going to end in 1844 and that Jesus would come at that time on one certain day in 1844. Over the years, he printed leaflets and gathered followers, but it was only in the last year, 1844, that he gathered the most followers. I suppose he convinced many with this sense of urgency. In fact, many of his followers sold their properties, sold their houses, forewent marriage or having children, and they waited for Jesus to come. On the day that William Miller had prophesied that Jesus would come, they went into a forest, gathered around a fire, and waited for Jesus to come. So the day passed, then the night passed, and they were still in that forest. They were still sitting there. And this is what's called the Great Disappointment. There were a few followers of the Millerites that took his teachings, but they ignored this obvious discrepancy, but still held that William Miller's teachings were true because they came from the Bible in their minds. One of those followers was Ellen White. Now, it should be noted that around this time, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination was formed. I would put it in around the mid to late 19th century. There were a few religious offshoots of Christianity that were coming about at that time. There were the Mormons, there were the Christian Scientists, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Phil Johnson made the observation that they were all within a 250-mile radius of each other. And it is certainly intriguing that they all came from that same geographic area. Many Christians considered Seventh-day Adventists, as well as those other three I've mentioned, a cult, because in their eyes, they believe that Seventh-day Adventists would teach false teachings from the Bible, and they also hold that these cults are considered elitist. And other than that, I really don't think there's much difference between them and mainstream Christianity. But for the purposes of this discussion, mainstream Christians believe that Seventh-day Adventist is a cult.
So the difference between a religion and a cult is a cult always has a founder.
That is true, yes.
Yes. So I think that's one of the major differences between a religion and a cult. But if you actually look at it, there's also a founder to Christianity, mainstream Christianity. So either Paul or Jesus, whichever version you're following. So by that definition, should Christianity also be called a cult? That's a very big question, but not for this video. We will avoid that for this video. We'll just focus on Seventh-day Adventism. But what is life like inside Seventh-day Adventism?
Well, there are, I would say 90% of what they believe is what they share in common with mainstream Christian denominations, but there are some key differences. Namely, they believe the true day of worship for Christians is Saturday, not Sunday. They believe the Sunday change came about when Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion, and that is how we saw the formation of the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the big changes they made, which the Seventh-day Adventists believe were heretical, was changing the Christian day of worship to Sunday. They believe that the early founders of Christianity were keeping with Jewish tradition, and therefore we should not diverge from that by worshiping on a Sunday. That's their belief.
So it took them about 1800 years to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why they suddenly decided that the Roman Catholic Church was heretical and what they did was wrong, but that's how it goes. And
so it also took Protestants to figure that Roman Catholic Church was Antichrist denomination or organization. Took 1500 years.
Yeah, I know. It did take a while. Yes.
Yeah. So just 300 years after Protestantism came about, that's not a long time. So they can still be considered religion. Is that why they're asking to be considered in mainstream denominations?
The reason why they are want to be considered a mainstream denomination is they truly believe that they have the true interpretation of Scripture compared to the other mainstream denominations. They also believe that most of the Protestant denominations that came about after Martin Luther first broke away, they believe they're now heretical and are now proxies of the Vatican. In recent years, we have seen overtures from the Catholic Church to Protestant denominations in the name of religious harmony or unity. And the Seventh-day Adventists are very, very suspicious of that. In fact, I would say they're the only denomination that is highly suspicious of the Catholic Church.
Okay. So you were talking about life inside Seventh-day Adventism. So I would like to ask one question on that.
Sure.
So growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, I know your mother was a Seventh-day Adventist, and she took you and your brother to church. So were there too many do's and don'ts?
There are quite a few. During church service, for example, women are to wear long dresses and not even with no jewelry, not even small earrings. So the earrings that I'm wearing right now, the Mangalsutra you're wearing right now, that would not be allowed. And also, so the Seventh-day Adventists are the only Christian denomination that tout a vegetarian diet. To their credit, I would say. So they do not eat any meat. I'll tell you why. Because they believe that previously the inhabitants of the earth, humans, were living until up to age 900. I'm sure you can recall stories from the Bible of Methuselah, for example, who lived to be more than 900 years old. And they believe that once humans started eating meat, then our lifespan considerably shortened to what it is now, between 70 and 80 years of age in most parts of the world.
So that's because humans turn meat eaters.
Yes, that's what Seventh-day Adventists believe.
This is an interesting point, because the friends, Seventh-day Adventist friends that I know were meat eaters.
Yeah,
So I
very
didn't
interesting.
know this was, yeah, it's very interesting. The Indian Seventh-day Adventists are meat eaters, for all I know.
Very interesting. Well, it certainly was true. Most Seventh-day Adventists I know in the US are vegetarian. As Ellen White gained more and more influence, it certainly became a part of it. I mean, it's an interesting fact. You know, the founders of the company Kellogg's that makes the cereals,
Mhm.
they were very much influenced by Ellen White,
Okay.
and
Okay.
they marketed health foods, especially those that conform to what Ellen White was teaching.
Okay, that makes sense. So Ellen White may be a vegetarian, and she made all the Seventh-day Adventists vegetarian. That's interesting. Yeah, just like Constantine was a sun worshiper, and he moved the worship day to Sunday from Saturday,
Yes.
which was the original worship day. So that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Mhm.
So what were the other don'ts?
Seventh-day Adventists are encouraged to keep the Sabbath strictly, and this will vary by church and by family. But I know when my brother and I were first baptized, along with my mother, into the Seventh-day Adventist church, she prohibited us from doing anything ungodly on the Sabbath Saturday. All we could do was read the Bible and go to church, and also watch any videos made by Seventh-day Adventist media companies. Um, and they have a lot of videos, especially about prophecy, which I can get to that in a little bit. Other do's and don'ts. Seventh-day Adventists are discouraged from marrying people from other denominations unless the other person has the intention of getting baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist. There is the verse, I believe it's from Corinthians, being unequally yoked. And they believe that even being married to another Christian from another denomination, if they're not Seventh-day Adventists, then they would be unequally yoked.
Hmm.
So that bears similarities with many exclusive cults for sure.
So, where were all these do's and don'ts recorded, documented? Did they have a different Bible, or were they following the same Bible as the mainstream Christianity?
They follow the same Bible as Christianity. They hold the Bible as important. They too believe in Martin Luther's edict of sola scriptura, just the Bible.
Mhm.
But they do hold the great controversy by Ellen White as important, just as important as the Bible. It's not a third holy scripture like with the Book of Mormon. But it is important.
Okay. So you said you and your brother were prohibited from doing anything ungodly. Would doing homework on a Saturday uh, be considered ungodly?
Yes, yes,
Okay. Okay. So it was just Bible and focus on God, on the Seventh-day Adventist God.
yes. And they believe, of course, that they worship the same God as any other Christian.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so you said they were not following any other Bible, right? So,
Right.
how were these do's and don'ts incorporated into a kid's lifestyle within families? Was it being tutored by the church pastors?
Very often it comes from the pastors. Other families also send their children to Seventh-day Adventist private schools where the children learn from a young age those do's and don'ts.
What do you think is the motivation behind Seventh-day Adventism?
I would say the motivation, especially for Ellen White, was certainly about control and wanting to be, prominent, wanting to have a group of followers. Wealth, as far as I know, I don't think she accumulated a great deal of wealth in her lifetime compared to some other leaders like Joseph Smith. She does have an estate, I think, somewhere in New York, and it's from what I've seen, what I've heard from others, it's just a humble home. But it was more so about control and having influence over a large group of people. As I mentioned earlier, she influenced the founders of Kellogg, and she, with many of their foods, were created based on her strange health beliefs. Like, for example, she believed that many ailments could be solved with bland foods, and even some undesirable behaviors like masturbation could be solved with bland foods. And and that's something to think about the next time you have a bowl of cornflakes. Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, so, what do you think of the homeschool movement? Can we tie that in to the cult-like behavior?
Yeah. I was not homeschooled. I was thankfully allowed to go to regular school. Otherwise, I probably would not be in the position that I am today. But I would say that the motivation to homeschool is driven by this same thing, needing to have influence. In this case, it's a smaller group. It's parents over their children, however many they have, and needing to influence what their children believe and what they see so that they do not stray from the path that they have set out for them. So I would say
Mhm.
yes. I do know many Seventh-day Adventists homeschool, and there are a variety of reasons, but I don't think many will admit but they want that sort of control that cult leaders want over a large group of followers.
Right, right. So, yeah, homeschool movement is a mini cult.
Mini cult. Mini
Yes,
cult.
and they're not as greedy as the cult, the actual cult founders.